What's something you'd like to do more of? About 2 years ago, a mentor of mine asked me this question. And I didn't think anything of it. It was just a little connection before content. What's something you want to do more of? My answer was scuba diving. At the time, I hadn't gone scuba diving in 4 years, but I grew up scuba diving for lobster under rocks, pulling them out in Massachusetts. I love being underwater. I'm a swimmer, free diver, scuba diver, love being under the water. But I hadn't gone in 4 years. And so when my mentor, Mark Levy, asked me this question, I was like, okay, didn't think anything of it. So it was a nice little chat, but it didn't mean anything until 6 to 8 months later. I was giving a keynote down in Florida to a bunch of learning and development professionals, and I had booked in a day early to fit in time to get in a dive hunting for shark fossils, something I'd never done. And I came out of the water and this realization hit me like a brick. The conversations that we start and have, even if they're seemingly mundane at the time, actually have the ability to edit and change the future. And so since I've had this realization, I'm connecting all of these dots. I'm hoping in this video to share some really inspiring stories, ideas, and questions that will help you edit the future and create a world that you want to be living in just by talking. By quite literally talking your way into tomorrow, or by inviting others to talk their way into tomorrow, just like I did over this really simple little question. Not long after scuba diving, I had this memory co-giving a keynote with my late co-author and co-founder, Will Wise. We wrote Ask Powerful Questions together, lovely human being. The subtitle of Ask Powerful Questions is Create Conversations That Matter. And we were co-giving this keynote on stage to 800 folks, and Will misspoke. He had dyslexia, and he misspoke and said, Ask Powerful Questions, Conversations That Create Matter. And at the time, 7 years ago, I just wrote it off as like, ah. And now I realized, holy smokes, the past 10 years of my work has been focused around creating conversations that matter. And I think that's beautiful. But I think the next 10 years of my work just might be focused on sparking conversations that create matter, that actually edit, change something in the material future. So I'm a bit obsessive. So after having these realizations, I went and digging into some research. And it turns out there's this question behavior effect thing. So if you ask somebody, what's your intention of giving blood today? Just asking that question actually increases the chance that someone veers off of their day and goes and donates blood right then and there by 8.6%. If you ask somebody, what's your intention to vote in this upcoming election? That question can increase the chances that somebody votes by 25%. And the most ridiculous that I didn't believe, I actually had to do deeper research into the actual study. It was a consumer study where they asked 40,000 people, what is your intention to buy a car in the next 6 months? I'm not thinking this future is editable by a little question. Of the group that was asked, what is your intention to buy a car in the next 6 months? Increase the chances that somebody actually bought a car by 35%. I thought it was a typo. I thought it was 3.5%. It was 35%. So in other words, the questions we ask don't just change the conversations we have, they change the world that we live in after that conversation happens. Or they can, depending on the questions that you ask and depending on the framing that you walk into a meeting, gathering, training, workshop, conversation in. Two more beautiful personal real life examples. One just on a feedback level. I've got a facilitator friend and dad named Nate Folan. Well, not my dad, but he's somebody's dad. And he has this habit where every half birthday for his kids, he just has the tradition of sitting them down, taking them on a little date, and just asking, how am I doing as a dad? Which first of all, as a dad, really struck me. I never even considered asking my kids that question. And I have since, and it's amazing how their response actually changes our relationship as parents, right? So in that way, how am I doing as a dad? How am I doing as a boss? How am I doing as an employee? It creates this nexus, almost as marking point, where you edit that present moment, and then everything that happens after that is through the lens and the filter of that conversation. And so you can't unsee, you can't unhear that. And there's something really magical about that. Now things get way more interesting when I introduce you to this chap I met at a conference. And he owned a bunch of pizza shops. And in conversation, he was telling me that at his pizza shop, he had a 100% annual employee retention rate. I don't know if you know anything about food and beverage. That is unheard of. 100% annual retention it just doesn't happen. And so naturally, my second question was, tell me how? And he said, I've got it. I know exactly how, because we have a really intentional process when we onboard somebody. When somebody comes to work at our pizza shop, we sit them down and we say something to the effect of, thank you. I'm so glad you came to work at the pizza shop. We really need your help. We got a lot of pizzas to make. But before that, I just want to recognize, like, we know you probably are not going to work at this pizza shop forever, that it's a step along the path of your journey. And so at day number 1, before I teach you how to press dough, spin pizzas, you can tell I'm not a pizza person. Before I teach you any of the technical stuff about this job, I just want to ask you, what do you want? Thinking about the next 5 years, like, what's a dream? What do you want to move toward? What ideally would you be moving toward? In other words, just a more sophisticated version of what's something you'd like to do more of. And if they don't have an immediate response, they say, cool, it's a big question. Can't wait to hear the answer the next time we meet, right? So they encourage, they can't force, but they encourage everybody to come up with an answer, because as soon as they give an answer, they hear that and they take it in and they say, cool, like, we want your time at this pizza shop to be a stepping stone that helps you get there. And so if you know you want to get your bachelor's degree or your GED or your master's degree, or you want to become an artist or whatever else, we want to hear that. And then if you have night classes on Wednesdays, we want to make sure you're never scheduled on a Wednesday, so that while you're working here, it can support your pathway to that dream. Can you imagine if every workplace came along and said, what do you really want? We know you might not work here forever. That is a powerfully human way. And I realize that depending on the context you're in, if somebody tells you they want to be an airline pilot and it's going to take 40 hours of flight time a week, okay, that might not be possible. So it's within reason, though. The point is, if you intertwine your future with somebody else's future, you can then be on the same team and help them get there. A custodian named Steve taught me, I think maybe the most powerful tool to ensure that conversations actually make a difference and edit the future. And that is, I was given leading a virtual workshop for a big company in Australia. And so I was in my office here at midnight, and I walked out of the door after the session and kind of crashed into Steve, who was cleaning up night shift. And we both scared the heck out of each other. So after we settled down a little bit, I asked Steve how he was doing. And he said, oh, I'm good. I had a meeting. And he said it kind of like it was like a novel thing. And I realized, well, maybe custodians don't have a lot of meetings. And so he goes, yeah, my boss called me down to his office. I was a little nervous at first. Turns out he cut my workload in half. Now I only have to clean 4 floors instead of 8. And he gave me a raise. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, wow, I gotta have more meetings. And what I love about that story is that I think if we remember Steve's story, what if every little chat, interaction, weekly meeting, what if we went into it expecting that something might happen here that will change what happens tomorrow or 3 weeks from now or 2 months from now? But I think as human beings, we tend to be very short-sighted. Even as we get wiser, we tend to really make decisions that affect us like in the immediate, this immediate gratification thing, as opposed to recognizing in this moment, somebody might say something, I might share something, a conversation might be had that fundamentally edits the way that my life looks like in the future. And if we hold that, if we raise the importance of every conversation, all of a sudden the narrative like, too many meetings, boring meetings, goes away because of 2 reasons. Number 1, if you don't feel like the meeting is going to make a difference, you should cancel it, get off your calendar, uninvite yourself, uninvite other people, give people the joy of missing out. But then the ones that do have potential to make a difference, walk into it with the assumption that this conversation will change what happens next. I want to introduce you to Alexis now. Alexis was a co-facilitator of mine, and we were leading this retreat years ago for like student entrepreneurs, and they were developing all these ideas, and these are like hyper passionate, idealistic people, so excited about whatever they're creating. And she had a student come up to her and was just sharing like gushing passion for this global nonprofit that he wanted to start, and he wanted to eradicate poverty, and he's just like going off on ideas. And Alexis looks at him, and just with all the love and compassion in the world, she looks and says, oh, that is amazing. What are you going to do tomorrow? And I think that question is just one of many that has the potential to change the world, because ideas are plentiful. It doesn't matter if you're creative or not. there are millions of things we could potentially do. It's what we actually choose to do and choose to do on repeat over time that actually makes a massive impact. So with all these stories and this perspective now, if you're a connector, if you're somebody who leads groups, runs meetings, facilitates things, is responsible for the goodness of a group, my question to you is, what are you going to do tomorrow? This video is posting on the opening day of the Connector Summit, this gathering that I host every December to invite people who are professional facilitators, educators, leaders, etc., who are responsible for running groups to help make connection and engagement easy in their own context. And this was the opening keynote was How Connectors Edit the Future. And it was an extended, much more interactive version of this. If you liked this idea and you're curious about the Connector Summit, you should totally save the date for next year, and there's probably a link somewhere that will help you do that.